Once you have your vehicle raised and supported with a jack stand underneath it, we're going to move along to removing all of our lug nuts and then removing the wheel. So the next thing that I'm going to do is just take this pry bar and I'm going to come right in between here, and I'm going to carefully try to push in those pistons a little bit. I don't need to go very far. I just want to ensure that they're definitely functioning the way that they should. Okay, make sure that moves. The next thing that we're going to do is follow our ABS wire up. You're going to find that you have a couple securing points down along here, and then of course you have the area up behind the front bumper where it connects into. There's going to be a little squeeze tab that you can grab onto, squeeze it, and then draw this down. There's the squeeze tab. Of course, once you disconnect it, inspect the area that it was connected into. If you see any funny colors, that's corrosion and it needs to be dealt with. This one looks fine, so we'll set it aside. Now we're just going to come over here and we're going to disconnect these. Okay, now we'll move along here to where it's secured to the knuckle. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is remove the bracket that holds the caliper to the knuckle. We're not going to remove the bolts that hold the caliper to the bracket. There's one bolt here, and there's one bolt up top. Remove the pair. Now once you have both bolts out, we want to make sure that we have something up here that we can hang the caliper on, because when we hang it, we want to make sure that we're not putting any pressure on our flex hose. Now with this hanging, let's go ahead and wiggle the pads around. You want to make sure that they're nice and free floating inside the caliper bracket. If they're stuck in there, well then there's an issue. These ones feel great, so we'll move along. With the caliper off of there, the next thing that we want to remove is the rotor. Now these are very common to be stuck right on the hub. Ours is actually free, but if yours is stuck, you could spray this area along here with some penetrant. And then of course take one of your lug nuts. We'll start it on there just a few threads, and then we can use our hammer and give it a couple loving bonks around this area here. One thing about that though is you want to be very careful not to damage your studs. Let's remove the rotor. The next thing we're going to do is remove our axle nut. Next we're going to take our punch and our hammer, come right in the center here, give that a few bonks, and we're going to break the axle free from the wheel bearing. Next, from the back side of the knuckle, we're going to go ahead and remove all three of our mounting bolts. There's one right here, one right there, and then there's one on the front, pretty much the same area as this one right here. There's one. Do the same to the other two. The next thing that we're going to do is separate our wheel bearing from the knuckle right here. Go ahead and take that axle nut, just start it on there a few threads. That's kind of like a safety nut. Essentially what I want to do now is go ahead and break this free using my hammer. I'm going to come right along the back edge here and try to draw this away. If that doesn't work, we'll try something different. Now if banging along here doesn't actually break it free, it's common that it's frozen inside the knuckle along this area here. So what I would tend to do after that is to take my hammer and come along one of these ears. I'm going to give it a couple loving bonks this way and then a couple loving bonks that way. That's going to help break free any of the corrosion or rust that's on the inside there, and then we should be able to get this off. Remove that axle nut, remove your bearing. There it is, friends. Okay, now that we have the bearing out of there, the next thing that we want to do is clean up this area. You can see that I have a lot of debris inside here. We want to make sure that we have it all out of there and it's nice and clean. The reason for that is because we're going to be putting the nice new bearing on there, and we want to make sure that it mates up perfectly and it's able to ground out because of it. Of course, it does have electrical current going through it, which is part of the ABS unit. Okay, that looks decent. Now the next thing we want to do is make sure that we inspect and clean the splines on our axle. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new wheel bearing. Of course, we're going to want to make sure that our bolts are nice and clean with some red thread locker. Go ahead and line it up. When we do this, we want to make sure that we have our ABS wire facing in this general direction, not on this side where the caliper is. Just going to slide it right in there. We'll take our 3 bolts from the back side, start them all in, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer specifications. Now let's torque all these bolts to 85 foot-pounds. With the wheel bearing mounted in, let's continue on to remounting the wire as well. I'll take my bolt, come right through the wire here, bring it up, line it up with the hole, and then snug it up. Now when we're putting in this bolt, you're going to notice that it tightens up before this actually stops moving, and that's very important. You want to make sure that this can still flex around like it is. Let's just go ahead and bottom this out. Okay, that's definitely tight. Just make sure that that can still move around. Okay, that can still move. Now we're just going to do this. We want to come up and over this clip and then bring it down. Line it up with the little groove there and then latch it in. This one is going to come from down, coming up just like this. Latch that in as well. And then of course we'll bring it along here. This should line up perfectly. Make sure all of those are nice and secure. If it pops free like this one right here, you know there's an issue. Just go ahead and press it back in there, give it a nice wiggle again. Now let's take the ABS wire, bring it up and through here, just like that, and then we'll go ahead and connect it in. Listen for a click, give it a nice tug. You definitely don't want that coming loose. Now up on the bearing here, we want to make sure that we coat this with some copper never sees. Just going to come right along that mating edge there. Take the rotor, slide it right on here. I'm going to grab one of my lug nuts and hold the rotor so it can't move around on here. Okay, now it's going to be time to install our caliper. Just make sure that the pads are sitting in there the way that they need to be. Grab those caliper mounting bolts and throw on a little bit of red thread locker. After that, we'll go ahead and slide this onto the rotor, start in both of our bolts, snug them up, and torque them to 85 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to get our axle nut on there. I'm just going to use a little bit of thread locker right on the threads there, and then we're going to insert the nut. Now typically with the nuts, you want to just go ahead and replace them, but if you don't have access to a brand new one, make sure that you use the thread locker like I said. We'll start it on there, and then we're going to snug it up by hand. After that, we're going to torque it to 184 foot-pounds. Now when you try to tighten up this nut, what you might happen to notice is that this is going to want to spin on you. If you take a nice long bar and carefully come across your studs like this, being very careful not to damage them, you can put it like that across to the ground, and that's going to help prevent this from spinning. Go ahead and tighten this up, torque it to 184. Okay, now we're at the point that we're going to go ahead and put the wheel on, but before we do that, we just want to pay attention to a couple things. Double check your flex hose. Make sure that it's not twisted. If it looks like it's got a little pigtail in it, more than likely it's twisted, and if that's the case, you just need to unbolt it and then retwist it. Essentially, you want it to look just like this right here. If it was twisted, it could cause a brake restriction. You're going to find a brake pull when you're driving down the road. Aside from that, double check your ABS wire. Give it a nice little tug. You want to make sure that these clips don't pop free and the ABS wire isn't just hanging around, potentially hitting up against something that it shouldn't. So now let's get the wheel on. Snug up your lug nuts. Now with the wheel safely on the ground, we want to continue on by torquing these lug nuts in a crisscross manner. Torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Once you have everything back together, hop in the truck and make sure you pump up your brake pedal so it's nice and firm. Okay friends, so we got the truck back together. We went ahead and pumped up the brake. Let's say you go ahead and start up the truck and the ABS light's still on. At that point, you want to make sure that you grab your little scan tool and you clear the ABS light. After that, go ahead and take it for a road test. Make sure the ABS light doesn't turn back on. Aside from that, safely get yourself down to your local alignment shop.